So number 4 here we've already talked about. Serious discipline should be handled by a biological parent. Again, I think that's maybe a temporary thing. Um, and it doesn't mean that a step parent can't have some disciplinary responsibilities. But I think the serious discipline problems still ought to be dealt with by the biological parent for a while. For example, if kids are supposed to come home and do their homework before they play, and then I think a step parent ought to be able to say, you guys remember, here's the rule, you need to do your homework before you play. That level of kind of discipline and guidance I think is absolutely appropriate. But if the kid says, I'm not doing that, and they throw a fit and they go outside anyway, I think the step parent then should try to reinforce that and say, look, I need to ask you to do this. You know, this is what your mom or your dad would want me to do. So I need to ask you to come back in the house and do that and do your homework. And the kid throws a fit and says, absolutely not, I'm not going to do it. I hate your guts. Then I think it's time for a step parent to say, okay, I'm not going to deal with this. You'll just have to have your mom or dad, whoever it is, deal with that. And let them do that, because we're talking about something that becomes emotional, becomes potentially really dysfunctional. And I think when that's the case, we have to kind of defer to the biological parent to deal with those things. Fifth thing, men should be actively involved in discipline. I think I would change that now to say both parents should always be actively involved. There's not really room for either parent to just bow out of discipline. I think that in most families, it always works better if you don't have that good guy, bad guy thing, but everybody's involved in discipline, and you create an atmosphere of good discipline as opposed to just kind of an incident to incident kind of approach. And that works better when you have two parents who are involved. Sixth thing, children from large families tend to adjust better. And that makes some kind of common sense. If you've been in a family of 4 or 5 or 6 people, and you come together with other people to create a remarried family, you're used to sharing things. You're used to sharing a bathroom or a bedroom. You're used to not being the center of attention all the time. On the other hand, if you were an only child for 7 or 8 years, and then your parents remarry, and all of a sudden you're one of 4, that's a serious change for you. And so it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that we need to be aware that kids who come from larger families are going to do better. Kids who are more used to being on their own or by themselves tend to adjust not so well. Seventh thing on the list, and this makes sense to everybody, I'm sure, but it's worth talking about, is that marital satisfaction in a remarried family correlates with step-parenting success. If you can't parent, you're going to have an unhappy new marriage. If you have an unhappy new marriage, you're going to have trouble being decent parents. So those two things have got to go together. One of the problems is that if we've been divorced and we've had a marriage fall apart, and we fall in love with this great person, and we just think that God has put them in our lives and things are going to be happy and wonderful again, and it's such a great thing. And I'm not being facetious. It really can be that, of course. Sometimes we're so focused on the marriage, and we just think this marriage is going to be so good, everything else will fall into place. That's just usually not true. You have to go into that with the idea that I love this person and I want to be with this person and we can have a great relationship, but we have to figure out how to be good parents together. Because if we're not, there's nothing that will drive us apart more than how we deal with our kids. If we're not together on it, if we don't have a good grip on it. So we have to help people understand that dealing with their kids and being good parents is not just this additional optional thing that happens. It's one of the absolute foundations of having a good remarried family. if we want to help people try to kind of understand and predict what's going to be hard, here's a decent list if you want to try to do some psychoeducation or work with couples that are maybe getting ready to be remarried. If you're doing premarital counseling with people who are doing a remarriage and blending a family together, here's some things that can help and can make a big difference. First of all, if there's a wide life cycle discrepancy between the two families, that can make it difficult. If you've got somebody who's 45 marrying somebody who's 27, it's not necessarily wrong or problematic in and of itself. But when you have people who are in two different places in the life cycle, the 45-year-old person is going to have maybe a 22-year-old kid. That creates some difficulty sometimes. So you need to kind of help people see where they are in kind of the family life process, and if their life cycle situations are going to kind of make sense to each other, or if they're going to have to really struggle to make them work together. Second thing, sometimes people who get remarried too quickly, they're kind of in denial about the loss and the pain of the first marriage, and sometimes they're trying to cover it up. That's kind of one of those things that we use to predict that you might have trouble. So if you go through a divorce and 6 months later you're remarried, I tend to think, man, you didn't have enough time there to get over it and deal with it. It doesn't mean that it's going to fail. It just means that it may be much more difficult. If people get remarried, and this goes with number two, if people get remarried and they really haven't resolved anything from the first marriage, there's a decent chance they bring that into the second marriage. That's why I think a year between marriages should be like a minimal thing, maybe even more than that, because you've got to figure out how to deal with the junk that happened to you in the first marriage. If you bring that into the second marriage, you're kind of setting yourself up to fail again. And we don't want to do that. That's our goal, is to not do anything like we did the first time. And one of the ways to do that is to take some time and be sure we dealt with the first relationship. Number 4, lack of awareness of children's difficulties. We've talked about that. People who go into a remarriage and they have no clue how tough it's going to be on their kids or how to deal with that are kind of doomed to fail. And so we have to help them understand those things. 5, the inability to give up the ideal. I said earlier, you have to help people come up with a new vision for the family, because they're not going to be the ideal, and they're not going to be the Brady Bunch. They're going to be whatever they really are, and that can be okay, but they have to realize what that is. People who try to draw firm boundaries are going to have problems. You've got to be flexible. You've got to have permeable boundaries. You've got to be willing to adjust, or you're going to fail as a remarried family. You can't be rigid. You can't have firm boundaries. It just doesn't work. Number 7 is kind of like that. Parents who really push for loyalty and cohesion in the new family are going to have trouble. For a child, your loyalty is with your old family, and it's going to be that way for a while, maybe forever. So even though you may like your new family, your step-parents, your step-brothers or sisters, even though you may really like them and become involved with them and be happy with them, your loyalty very often tends to be with your original family. And so when parents get remarried, they want to forget about the old family. They want the old family to disappear, and they're pushed their kids sometimes to say, no, this is your family now. This is our family. This is what it means to be a family. That's going to cause problems with the kids because their loyalty is elsewhere, and we have to recognize that. We have to allow time for them to shift some of their loyalty to the new family. If we try to exclude people in the old family, we're going to have trouble. Grandparents are grandparents regardless of divorce. And so you have to include them. You have to include aunts and uncles. Grandparents can handle losing a son-in-law or daughter-in-law. They can't handle losing a grandkid. And so we have to figure out ways to include them. Again, we have to have good, permeable, healthy boundaries. Number 9, the denial of differences, that pseudo-mutuality. trying to make everybody smile and say everything's perfect, everything's perfect, everything's perfect. It's just ridiculous. Everything's never perfect in any family, particularly in a remarried family. You're bringing together two sets of stuff. You're going to have more problems. You just got to accept it and figure out, okay, how do we deal with these things? Recognize them, admit them, talk about them. Don't deny. Don't try to be something that you're not. 10th thing, a shift in custody near the time of the remarriage. Again, remember, for kids, the more things that change, the more difficulty they have, the more things stay the same, the better off they are. So if you have a remarriage and a kid who's moving from one parent's home to another parent's home, that's too much at one time. If you're going to have major life changes for your kids, try to do them one at a time. Give them a little bit of a chance to recover from something before you try to do something else. We'll come right back and finish.